Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Lasse Clausen. I'm one of the co-founders of 1KX. We're an early stage crypto network investor. In fact, we're actually the first fund in the space that said we only want to invest in tokens. It was a very esoteric strategy in 2017, 2018 when you had private enterprise blockchains were a big thing back then. Blockchain, not Bitcoin, equity in our tokens, etc. And from day one, we thought really the big innovation is in open source token networks. And yeah, I'm very excited here to be with Marco from ZK Sync Meta Labs. Disclosure, we're very, very biased investors in Meta Labs. We invested in the first round in 2018. So this is when we started thinking about optimistic and zero knowledge based rollups. And yeah, really saw or predicted that basically ZK-based, zero-knowledge-based rollups are going to be the future. So I'm very excited to be talking with Marco today.
Thank you, Lasse. And maybe a quick introduction. I'm Marco. I'm the head of the business team at Meta Labs. Before this, I was the CEO of a fund management company, of the Asian operations of a global fund management company. And before that, I was a quant, the guys that do the modeling for complex derivatives. So for me, crypto is both an atonement for all the sins of previous traditional finance work, but also is something that I used to do all the time. I started mining Bitcoin very early on, and I've always been involved personally in crypto, and I decided to merge these two things in my life and actually get some free time like this.
And yeah, for those unfamiliar with you and then ZK Sync, maybe in very high level terms, what is ZK Sync Era? What can I do with it?
So ZK Sync is a layer 2, is a zero knowledge rollup. What does it mean? It means that we take big batches of transaction, compute a proof that they are valid. This proof is also very small, and we send this proof back on Ethereum, which means that you get the same user experience that you have on Ethereum, but it's just much, much cheaper. You have the same security, the same decentralization properties, which are inherited by the layer 1, but the environment is very, very cheap to operate. Everything else is pretty much the same. If you're a developer, you have a similar developer experience. If you're a user, you have a similar user experience. We've always focused very much on improving and not just making sure that we were, coping with Ethereum. So in reality, the UX is slightly better. You have sub-second confirmation, and the developer experience is similar if you want it to be. But because we have a slightly different design, we can allow you to develop things that are more complex than those that can be done on Ethereum.
And I think to reiterate how amazing zero knowledge proofs are. I would say also the invention of blockchain technology, almost as big of an invention is actually zero knowledge proofs. And maybe to give a simple example, what you can do is you can have many, many transactions, if not millions of transactions, and you can express all of those, lots of data, lots of things happening, and you can express a mathematical proof that all of these transactions happened in one succinct little proof, and that is what you store in Ethereum. So you basically get the security of Ethereum, but you have very, very high scalability, lots of speed, and I think just to reiterate how much of a big innovation zero knowledge proofs are. It's also the timing is quite fortunate. There's been decades of research into this, and just some breakthroughs, and some of them, your company was actually part of that. It's 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it was too early for zero knowledge proofs in production. And we just basically hit that inflection point a very, very few years ago.
Yeah, it would have been impractical to do what we can do today just 4 or 5 years ago. It took us 4 years to be where we are. Today we are very, very happy. The new proving system, Bojum, that we launched a few weeks ago is the most performant in the industry, according to third-party benchmarks, is a little bit more than one scale of magnitude more performant than the other, than the next one. But also, so we are making the computation of this proof very fast and very easy to do, but we are also changing the hardware that is required to run this proof. I think Sandy before mentioned hardware acceleration. It's a very important thing in the space. We have our own internal hardware acceleration team, and we have been advancing this quite a lot. There's a bunch of prizes around in the community. Our team has been performing very, very well in those. And we moved moved from running this proof on gigantic machines that at the time were bigger than the one, say, OpenAI use, to now the current system in production use the A100 machine, similar to what OpenAI use. Our new prover can use a GPU that is a consumer GPU with like 6 to 8 gigabytes of RAM. 16 gigabytes of RAM machine are actually easier to find, so that's what probably we are going to use. But we are making the system very, very easy to decentralize, very easy to run on normal cloud. And all of these advances would have been impossible. I mean, we were speaking with very smart people in research that essentially told us that what we were saying was impossible. And eventually, you know, they changed their mind a little bit.
Yes, I remember very well that I introduced your team and your company to a very prominent, very large investment fund of the space. At that time, you were raising money at $100 million valuation, and one of the most prolific cryptography professors in the world said what they're doing is 5 years out, which is EVM compatibility. I'll touch on that in a second. And you know, I could not convince them otherwise. The professor said so, and then basically 1 year later, they invested at $1 billion valuation. So I think that's, you know, the other really, really big sort of breakthrough that that ZK Sync managed to do, because basically everyone in the Ethereum community or in the industry thought that zero-knowledge proofs, for them to be EVM compatible, meaning that if you have an application on Ethereum and you've built everything that it runs on Ethereum, for that to work on a zero-knowledge based rollup, that is going to be 5 years out. And you sort of have to rebuild everything. If you're an engineer, if you're an application developer, you have to almost rebuild the whole thing just to make it work on your ZK Sync. And you know, this is what's called EVM compatibility, meaning that you can just use the application that you already have on Ethereum and you can put it on the layer 2. And yeah, and I think that's where you also beat the estimates by basically 4 years, because 1 year later you launched ZK, you know, an EVM compatible zero-knowledge rollup.
Yeah, and I mean, ZK Sync has been at the forefront of this. We launched ZK Sync V1, which is now called Lite, I think more than 3 years ago now. It has the oldest rollup, the oldest ZK rollup to the best of my knowledge. We were also first launching the first ZK VM, and you know, we are now, you know, improving on the prover technology and on the GPU proving and hardware acceleration. So we are trying to stay at the forefront of the technology. And over the past couple of months, we also announced that we are completely opening the entire tech stack. So we have a chain that is running today. It's called ZK Sync Era. It is actually very well received by the community. We are humbled and very thankful. Today we are running at around 29 million transactions a month, which is very close to Ethereum at around 30 million. But it's like almost twice as much the second of the layer 2. So we are by far the layer 2 with the biggest amount of usage. We have more usage than all the optimistic rollup, all the school optimistic rollup combined. So the zero knowledge revolution is coming, and the users are adopting it. In order to build Era, we use a bigger technology called ZK Stack. So Era is the first instantiation of ZK Stack that we use to build our own chain. But ZK Stack is bigger than this, and the idea is that no single system that is monolithic, including ZK Sync Era, will be able to accept all transactions. So it seems strange to say, but we are already thinking that we are not going to be able to cope with the demand that we are going to have relatively soon. And so we built a general purpose technology that allows anybody to spin up their own chain. These chains are modular, so you don't have to think about a lot of the things that you otherwise have to deal with if you build your own chain. So you don't have to think about decentralization, you don't have to think about security, because those are inherited from Ethereum, exactly like for every rollup and ZK Sync Era in particular. And they're sovereign, so they're truly yours. They have nothing to do with ZK Sync Era. They simply share the same technology. The code is already MIT Apache licensed, it's free, and open source is truly free and truly open source. You can take it, use it, and we are here to help you to do so. And we committed by making it open source not to be able to stop you, you know, if you decide to do that. So ZK Stack is a general set of technology that allow anybody to now benefit from ZK Rollup. You don't need to be, we don't need 4 years of your life, like for us, to get to this point. You can do it in a very short period of time, because now the technology is ready.
Yeah, maybe with that, could you elaborate a little? I think from day one, it's been a very, very mission-driven and values-driven project. And I think maybe you can just elaborate a little bit on that and share the values of the team, yeah.
Yeah, so Meta Labs is not really, is a company in a formal sense, but we don't think of it as a company, we think of it as a mission-driven project. Everything we do is there to accelerate freedom for all. We want to make users being able to be sovereign in their interaction with other users. And everything we do is an instantiation, is a manifestation of this, and it's informed by this principle. So everything we do is open source and is free. Very quickly after we launch it, sometimes immediately at the same time we launch it, everything is available. We do our best to document it also, as best as we can, but of course that can have some improvement. But we are really working toward making sure that our user and our developer can just take what's there and build upon it. And the idea is to make the system very, very open as well. So today, like many Rollup, we are running in a centralized fashion, meaning that we are running the sequencers, we are running the prover, which are the two entities that one order the transaction and the other compute these zero-knowledge proofs. This is a very uncomfortable situation for us because it goes against the principle. And we have committed already many times to try to be the first to fully decentralize. We will, of course, be super happy if someone else does it even further, even faster, because we'll be able to learn and know how they do it. But we are totally committed to make the entire system truly decentralized. So it's already free and open source, and that's the final step to really give it to the community to own and direct in whatever direction it will see fit in the future.
And I can actually attest to this. It's not just sort of nice talk on a stage. We're also community friendly. I've been in a situation where your co-founder was offered hundreds of millions of dollars by investors, but they wanted very close to control of the network. They wanted a very, very large chunk. They wanted 10% of the network. And remember, with these technologies, what makes them special is that they're not owned by anyone. They're not owned by 3 people. They're not owned by 3 entities, right? The security comes from decentralization. That just means that many, many different people, ideally the users, the stakeholders of this technology, collectively control this. But it's not a small group of people or one entity that controls this. And so that matters a lot, that when you're raising money, you cannot sell too much of your token network, because this is when you lose your decentralization. And then you basically lose the entire point of why you're even doing this. And I've been involved with conversations where large funds offered a lot of money to the team to invest, tens of millions of dollars, and they really stayed strong, and they pushed back over several rounds of negotiations to really sell that fund only a very, very small percentage of the network. So you'll see lots of people up here claiming all these things, and I can prove to you this is one of the few projects that didn't give in the temptation of tens of millions of dollars and actually stayed true to the principle.
Yeah, we are trying our best. And we think this is not just because it's the right thing to do. It's also the selfish thing to do. There was a very interesting presentation from Denison from Tally at ITCC, where he's essentially saying that, the example is Zynga and Facebook. You don't want to create your own great product with great product market fit on Facebook anymore, at least not in a gaming space, because Facebook proved that they can just shut you down. And that the lack of credible neutrality, which is in turn created by the fact that you have a small number of people that can control the system. So by making it credibly neutral and credibly decentralized, it's both the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. It's a selfish and selfless act at the same time.
Right, because if you look at it, most technology companies, they stop growing. They get to this point where nobody voluntarily helps this company succeed even more, because they're so big, they control so many aspects, they can kill your company if they want to, and they kind of just stall out. And at that point, all they're doing is monetizing sort of their existing reach, their existing user base, their existing technology lock-in. And I think with token networks, you can actually become bigger than that, because you never get to this adversarial position where, oh, here's the 3 guys in the boardroom against me who's dependent on the technology. And, as an example, you have banks that are still locked into IBM mainframes and are being sold the hundreds integration on top to get anything done. I don't know if anyone here is using Salesforce, but after a while, you're basically, you're a Salesforce slave. You can't get out of that thing anymore. And anything you really want to do, any additional feature you want, is another integration that you get upsold on. And so this is really part of the core principles why this technology or this industry can actually really be different, because you're avoiding this sort of technology and vendor lock-in through decentralization. And so I'm intrigued about this upgrade of using Bojum. Do you have more? Yeah, do you have just more details on that? Because that is, potentially for us, we in 2018 basically decided that zero knowledge based rollups is not optimistic rollups. Optimistic rollups were always considered a hack in the meantime because EVM compatibility is 5 years out. And so we've, have great teams that build great optimistic rollups, but it was always thought as something we need that in the meantime, but really the end game is zero knowledge-based rollups. And so we've got that now, but then you're taking it one step further.
Yeah, so we were the first to launch it on mainnet already, and now we have upgraded to what is today the most performant proving system in the world, to the best of our knowledge. There is a lot of things. So provers are a very complex technology, are a huge trade-off. And I don't think it's super interesting for the audience to go into the technical details here, but maybe there is one thing that is very important for us. One of the things we really wanted to optimize for with Bojum is the fact that it runs on hardware that is consumer grade. So one thing that made us very uncomfortable before is that we were depending on this very large specialized hardware, which in turn meant that whoever runs that hardware becomes a central point of failure for the entire system. You have a liveliness issue, essentially. If someone manages to shut down those 5 entities in the world that can deal with this very specialized, expensive, and difficult to manage pieces of equipment, if you manage to shut them down, you shut down the system, which is very against the broad philosophy. Bojum is interesting because it runs on GPUs that are consumer-based. So the plan is to run them on 16 gigabytes GPU, but in our test, use half of that RAM as well. It's just that 16 gigabytes GPU are more available in the cloud, and so it makes the system more resilient. It's extremely easy to spin them up. You can spin them up in very, very abundant amounts. This also creates another very important feature, is that today, if you have the usage that we have, which is great in the rollup world. We have 43% of all the daily active addresses across all the layer 2, and we do 30 million transactions when the second does 16, 17. So our usage is quite good compared to Rollup, but is tiny. We are really not happy. This usage should go up by 3, 4, 5 factor of magnitude to really support the world of value to move on chain. And that just cannot happen if you have specialized hardware. We were already using too much. At some point, we had to negotiate with Google to get more of these pieces of hardware that were unavailable. And that's very, very difficult. You can't then go and sell this general purpose technology to another 100 companies because there's just no space for them. Now with Bojum, there is space for everyone, basically.
And then you have another exciting upgrade. You're already running it in parallel now. Alex spoke about this at our summit in Paris. Do you have more details on that? Because I think the cost of transactions is going to be really dramatic, the impact, right?
Yeah, so we are running it in parallel. That's another interesting thing, is one of the technical features is for many rollup, because of the way they set up the system, and if they have been not super careful, or maybe they didn't have time because they developed in a rush, you can set these things up in a way that is very difficult to upgrade them. And we saw an instance of this with one of the rollup that erased some accounts. They were very old, and but this is something you don't want to do. You don't want to enter into that conversation, and it touches on the immutability. And if you erase them and then you recreate them, you just create all these precedents that are not desirable. We spent a lot of time to develop the system also because we made it upgradable. So Bojum is already live and is proving things in parallel to the old proofing system, which allow us to really test and make sure that everything is ready. And then we will go into a phase when we will continue to keep it in parallel, but switch the real proving system onto Bojum, and eventually we'll remove the old proving system. Because the new proving system is much faster, is much lighter on resources, and it will allow us to scale to the next level.
And so if you have some price points where we are, what's a typical token transfer transaction today, what will be after the upgrade, and then what is this concept of layer 3? Because I mean, we've got L1, we've got L2, now we're going to have L3. What is that?
So I think on the first question is a little bit difficult to say because in parallel there is 4844. And so a majority of the cost on any rollup, including ZK Sync, is the cold data. And Ethereum is changing the cost of the cold data by still an unclear amount. We don't know. I heard the original estimation of 100x, as low as 2x. It looks like today for anything that is not a simple transfer, it's probably going to be, say, 5, 6, 7x. So cold data is already 99% of the cost for ZK Sync. So if that goes down by 6 or 7x, transaction go down today. A transaction is in the region of 10 to 20 cents, which is cheap, but not as cheap as we want. We want to bring down this number to sub 1 cent. We think that's a price point that starts to be attractive for large mass scale application, and we think is feasible with Bojum and 4844 in a short period of time.
And then what do L3s look like on ZK Sync?
Right. So with Rollup in general, so Rollup is just something that exists on top of Ethereum. A way to see it as an abstraction is a layer 1 smart contract that contains all the assets and is a mechanism to update the state of the entire system, and then stores the state of the system on chain too. So it's just a layer 1 smart contract. 98% of all the complexity lives in the server, the things that produce the ZK proof. And that's completely off-chain. So what you can do is you can take the layer 1 smart contract and deploy it on the layer 2, and now you have a layer 3. We are calling these chains in general hyperchains. We think is more interesting than the dichotomy layer 2, layer 3, layer 4. The idea is that you can launch your hyperchain in whatever mode you want. They are totally sovereign. They can be a layer 2, or they can be a layer 3. They can be a layer 3 on top of your layer 2 or someone else's. They can be a layer 3 on Era. They can be launched in rollup mode, where all the data goes on Ethereum. It's a little bit more expensive, but super secure. Or you can launch them in Validium mode, where some of the data, all the data goes somewhere else, or in Volition mode, where some of the data goes somewhere else and some goes on Ethereum. So all of these customization are going to be available to everyone very, very quickly. You may want to launch a layer 3 if you are very, very interested in super scaling. So the idea of layer 3s is, especially if you launch them without the data availability going on Ethereum, is that they become very, very, very cheap. But there is a problem with all this multiplication of layers. So hyperchain for us are an interesting, or ZK Stack in general, is an answer to the story of dApp chains and the story of private chains that you mentioned before. If you launch your dApp chain as an alternative layer 1, you have a bunch of things to deal with. It's a super complicated endeavor, but there is two problems that are very difficult to solve. One is that you need to create a bridge to Ethereum, and that bridge is going to be the thing that people will attack and will absorb 20 to 30% of your engineering time, and is a Damocles sword. It's something that, when it hits, it destroys the project and probably destroys it forever. And the second is you need to bootstrap the decentralization property of your network. Otherwise, it's kind of just a database. And hyperchain is fundamentally better because these two problems instead completely disappear. They come for free by being a rollup. Rollup don't really have a bridge, although we call them bridge, they're not really bridges. It's just a layer 1 smart contract that own all the assets. So we have just native layer 1 tokens, which is fundamentally better, fundamentally more secure. And you inherit the security of Ethereum. So again, you don't need to care about those problems. And you can focus on customizing your environment for execution, exactly for the right execution that your user base needs. And we think that's very interesting. And the same is true for private chains, which similar argument is that with a private chain, before you were going to R3 or Corda, to Hyperledger. The problem with these is that technically they are highly scalable, but practically they don't scale. And they don't scale because they're not credibly neutral, and the argument that we were trying to say before. But then there's a problem. So if everybody has their own hyperchain, then you get this massive fragmentation of liquidity.
Different islands with no, very wonky, unsafe bridges to connect to them, maybe. Yeah. Or you have to go to that island first to get to that island that's next door.
Yeah, which is a terrible exercise. You can wrap things, and you create these chains of risk and liabilities that are very ineffective and remind us a little bit of traditional finance, where Lehman goes, and then all of a sudden the domino starts to fall in a way that is very difficult to predict. Self-sovereignty and self-custody can isolate the system from that, make it very resilient, but then you require a very strong communication network. So with ZK Stack, one thing that, to the best of our knowledge, the other team are not yet building or not yet focusing on, is we're building something that is called Hyperbridge, which is a general messaging system that allow you to send messages from any of these hyperchain to any other hyperchain in a way that is very fast, few minutes, not days, not weeks, is very cheap, few cents, and is cryptographically secure. So it doesn't need any human, it doesn't need any trust in anybody, it doesn't need any liquidity. So you can create very interesting tooling with this and essentially unify all of these chains together.
And I'm being asked a lot this. Well, when is my grandmother going to use crypto? When is this mainstream adoption coming? And I think we've been talking about mainstream adoption for too many years. And quite frankly, I think it only now starts to make sense for entrepreneurs to come in and start building actual end consumer mainstream applications. Because of infrastructure like this, you can get to sub 1 cent transactions, that cost less than a cent. You have account abstraction natively built in, meaning also that you as a company, you can actually pay gas for these accounts, for these users, so you don't need to first get some ETH or get this native token to pay the transaction fee. And we're talking with a bank, a very large bank, who wants to run this experiment of creating a corporate banking product, a corporate bank account, and a consumer bank account fully on the blockchain. And especially the consumer account, we are telling them, okay, now is actually a good time to really start building this. Anything before, what was promised a lot in end consumer adoption really, quite frankly, wasn't there. The last big wave of mainstream consumers came with the 21 bull market, which happened, mainly for liquidity reasons. But then you have a normal person that buys an NFT for $50 and then spends $250 transaction fees, and they're gone forever. They never come back. And so, technology like ZK Sync, hyperchains are actually what make us bullish that in the next 3 years, I think we are going to see some, end consumer applications that actually can support 10, 20 million, 30 million monthly active users.
Yeah, and so if I can, add a couple of points, everything we do is to try to create an environment that will give you, the developer, and your user 3 broad things. So one is this magical UX. The ability to offer magic UX comes from native account abstraction. The fact that it is native means, well, first of all, it's great to see that Ethereum is embracing it as well with 4337. Most of the Rollup are implementing it too. We may actually add the 4337 natively as well. Having it natively means that all the user automatically can benefit from it. So a big issue with non-native account abstraction, like today on Ethereum, if you implement some features, your user will need to deploy a new smart address, migrate all the asset, and then they can use this new feature. And the migration are a pain. Nobody wants to do them. If you do the same on ZK Sync, instead, as soon as you add a smart feature, every user, without doing anything at all, will immediately have access to it. So that's one thing that is very important for us. The second is limitless scale. So zero knowledge proof enable a change of paradigm. Today, blockchains, until now, have been supply-constrained systems where they look like an island. Ethereum looks like an island, or like the city of Seoul. Once you finish the space, price skyrocket. I think everybody can experience that. Normal roll-up look like the invention of skyscraper. You can build a 30th floor on an island and you get more space, but at some point people come, and again, you have 20 million people in Seoul, prices skyrocket again. ZK Rollup instead scale much more like Google, like a server. If we have more capacity to throw at GPUs, we can scale limitlessly. This is a feature that I think is very important for you to consider when you decide what to want to use to build. It makes the system future-proof. And the third is that any hyperchain that you make is not an island in and of itself, is embedded into a network of either chain. And so you benefit from this aggregated network effect. If your neighbor builds 1 million users, you have access very, very quickly, very, very closely to those 1 million users. And that's, I think, a great thing to be as compared to build your own very nice, shiny place on the moon that is isolated and takes a huge amount of effort to reach and to come back from.
So, you know, we know optimistic rollups launched a little earlier, have some, especially TVL, I think they're doing really well. Then we've got zero-knowledge rollups. We already have, you said you roughly 40% of all transaction is
40% of all the daily active users, and a little bit less in terms of transaction.
Right. And so already more than the 2 biggest optimistic rollups combined, I think. And so in 3 years, where do you think optimistic versus zero-knowledge rollups, where do you think we're going to be?
So I think both the big optimistic rollup provider have said that they like the concept of moving on to ZKP at different speed. One is developing with third party, the other said that they can do it anytime they want. So I think eventually the technologies will converge, and the optimistic rollup will all migrate into becoming ZK rollup.
All right, you've heard it here. In the future, it's all going to be zero-knowledge based rollups. With that, we're coming towards the end. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.